Please give a warm Georgia Tech welcome to our guest, Jill Vialet.
Good afternoon. So I wanted to start by playing a game. And so the game I want to play, I've been sort of debating. So I was choosing between two games. But are y'all okay with getting up and kind of moving out of your seats just briefly to start? You're good? I saw somebody on crutches outside. I got worried about his participation, but I suspect nobody's on crutches in here. All right, so we can do it. Let me describe it, and then we'll get you up. So the way the game we're going to start off with is it's called Rochambeau Rockstar. And the way the game works is basically it's a giant single elimination game of rock, paper, scissors. Now, rock, paper, scissors, we go by different names all over the country. Rochambeau in some parts, rock, paper, scissors. And just to review, because not everybody knows about rock, paper, scissors, believe it or not. So you go Rochambeau, and on bow, on the third one, you're going to throw out either rock, paper, or scissors. Okay? You throw out rock, it crushes scissors. Scissors cuts paper, paper covers rock. Everybody good on it? Now, I'm not one of those people who believes you go 2 out of 3. I'm like straight up. If you throw the same thing, you do over until you have a resolved winner. But we just go straight up, Rochambeau, and you show on bow. Not Rochambeau shoot. We don't say shoot. We don't need any more of that. So Rochambeau, okay? And so the way it's going to work is I'm going to say the magic word, which is it bulldog? All right, so I'm going to say bulldog. Y'all stand up. You're going to find a partner. You're going to throw out Rochambeau. Whoever the victor is going to go out in pursuit of other victors. Meanwhile, behind you, the person you just defeated will become your cheering section. Now, this is the part that's really open to your own personal interpretation, right? So I'm a particularly exuberant cheering section. So what's your name? BB. So I go up against BB. BB defeats me. I'm then BB's cheering section. Now, I bring a little of my personal self to it. I'm like, go BB, it's your birthday, and I'll follow BB around until she goes and rock, paper, scissors against whoever she finds. Now, let's say BB wins again. The person she just defeated along with that person's cheering section and I are now continuing to follow along BB. So what you have is an ever diminishing number of winners, an ever growing posse of supporters. We ultimately get down, we'll have 2 final Rochambeau rock stars. Ultimately, one person wins, and we all cheer for that person. Any questions? Yes?
It's Yellow Jackets.
Yellow Jackets? All right, thank you. I was asking, I needed help there, and y'all didn't throw out a magic word, so I appreciate it.
Oh,
there we go. So Yellow Jackets, so the magic word is going to be Yellow Jackets. I'm going to say Yellow Jackets. You're going to stand up. No eating. What's going on with the eating back there? They're going to put the pizza down. All right. Everybody, 2 thumbs up if you understand. I got a lot of thumblessness going on out there. Yellow Jackets. Go on. Have that. You can take a picture. Go on. Go on. Go on. Go ahead. Go. It's a Rochambeau Rockstar tournament. So you throw out. What's up? Let's do it. Let's do it. Hero. Hero. Go hero. It's your birthday. Go. 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 Oh, it's up. Is it hero?
Yeah.
Okay. Now we're all going with hero. 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 You got somebody? You're not in? Hero, 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 hero. Hero, go, hero, 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 hero. Yeah, hero, we're all with hero. Hero, hero. Yo, it's like getting lined up. Hero, hero, hero. Hero, assert yourself, man. Go. Hero, hero. Come on, hero. Go, hero. Yeah. Hero. Woo! Hero. 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 Yeah, I think people are slightly hungover. That's my take on this crowd. Hero, 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 hero. He's walking away. Hero, did you get in? See, Hero, I think we're taking you this way. Hero, come over on this way. I'm giving up on this hero. Hero's come on this way. Come on, come with Hero. Come on, come with me. Come on. Right. Hero, come on. Come on. It's Hero. Oh, got you. Here we go. Hero, go Hero. Come on now.
Come on, Hero.
Yeah,
all right, let's go.
Hero. Thank you, Robert. So if you can hear me, touch your head. If you can hear me, touch your shoulders. If you can hear me, touch your knees. So the nonprofit I started 17 years ago, Playworks, is founded on this idea that when we are playing, we are in a very different space when it comes to interacting with one another, when it comes to taking in information around us. It gives a sense that I think is often rare, especially for kids in school, that they have a modicum of control of the world around them, that they actually feel seen, that they have an opportunity to know others and be known in a way that feels authentic and true to who they really are. And what we know about both that experience developmentally, as well about the brain research, about what's going on when you're playing, is that that creates a state that is very conducive to learning. So Playworks basically goes into schools, and we make it possible for kids to have more engaged opportunities to play. And we do this in two different ways. One is, maybe most importantly, by creating a space in which the grown-ups involved at the school feel like it's safe, feel like in doing it they aren't absolutely forfeiting control and somehow losing control over the learning, teaching process. Because there's a lot of concern out there about keeping students controlled and organized in a way that sometimes can be inhibiting to other efforts to give children more free rein and more control over the educational process themselves. The other thing we do is we actually create an environment in which kids are really liberated to unlock their own superpowers. And so I want to talk a little bit more about that. This whole idea of superpowers is one that I'm particularly interested in. William James is the brother of Henry James, father of American psychology, and he wrote all about unleashing our energies. And essentially what he was talking about in energies back when he was sort of discovering psychology was in some ways what we might describe as superpowers. So I have a 9-year-old son, and he and I talk a lot about superpowers. And we play a lot of games around, if you could have any superpower, what would you have? And for most people, it really comes down to the flying or being invisible thing. But I'm actually most interested in real superpowers. And it brings up an important debate. So there's the Batman question. Are you familiar with the Batman question? So the Batman question is, does Batman actually count as a superhero? Because some people would argue he's not really a superhero. He's a rich guy who, has a lot of amazing toys, and he's really, really smart, and he has a badass butler. But really, to be a superpower, you have to be a mutant, really. So, that's what's, and I really feel strongly that actually superpower and superhero status should be a much more democratic, accessible thing. I actually believe that superpowers are those sort of quirky, authentic, individual traits that you bring to bear in a moment of real extremity. And you can either bring your superpowers to bear for good or for evil, but the critical thing about superpowers is that they are brought to bear in an extraordinary way. So for me, Batman is a superhero, and his superpower is really that he takes what could almost be described as sort of a paranoid, obsessive, compulsive quality, and he translates that into being a really amazing thwarter of ne'er-do-wells. So that's, for me, that's his superpower, is taking that OCD and then making it something that fights crime. So y'all can giggle anytime you want. I'm talking about superpowers. So that's, when I think about superpowers, that's my frame of reference. And so what's interesting to me when I look at what I do with Playworks is not the idea that we would go into schools and do all these great things for kids, but that we would create an environment where kids would find their own superpowers. So I started Playworks 18 years ago. It was mentioned that it's the second nonprofit I started. When I was right out of college, 23, I started my first nonprofit, and I ran that for 9 years. And it was a children's art museum. I grew up making art, love art, and I was noticing that in a lot of schools that art had been eliminated. And so we just started with sending artists into schools in Oakland, California, where I live, And that grew, and then we got a space, and we started displaying the art. And over the years, MoCA, the Museum of Children's Art, really grew to the place where we were serving about 20,000 kids a year. Now, in the context of doing that, I was out in all these schools, and what I was seeing over and over again was that just the way school felt had really changed. That when I was going out to schoolyards, especially recess, I lived for recess as a kid. I grew up in Washington, D.C., and when I would go out to the schoolyard and at recess time, what I would see was not what I remembered. It felt like there were a few kids playing a couple of games, but a lot of kids were on the periphery kind of trying to stay out of harm's way. And there's good chaos and there's bad chaos. And what I was seeing out in the schoolyard was a lot of chaos that kind of made me uncomfortable. It didn't feel like kids felt like there's happy chaos and freaked out chaos, and it tended more towards the freaked out chaos. So there was one day, actually, when I was visiting a school in North Oakland where we had an artist residency program, and it was right after lunchtime, and I'm sitting in school offices. Those of you who weren't called into the school office recently or ever, the whole school office setup has not changed since I was a kid, right? You got the big outer office where all the hubbub is happening, and then you have sort of the inner sanctum of the principal's office. So I'm sitting there one day, it's right after lunch, I'm waiting for the principal to come out. She's in her office, I'm waiting, she's running late. And so she finally emerges from her office, and she looks cranky the way only an elementary school principal can. She's got the neck vein thing going on, and she has these 3 little boys following behind her, and they look miserable, like they've just been chewed out. And she dismisses those 3 little boys to the secretary and has her deal with them. She ushers me into her office. Now, remember, at this point, I'm still doing the Children's Art Museum, so I'm not there at all to talk about recess. But this principal sits me down, and she starts going on and on and on about the litany of reasons that recess is hell. She's describing how her teachers find every reason under the sun to be anywhere other than the recess yard. She's describing how these 3 little boys get in trouble a couple of times a week, how they're not bad kids, but their self-image is starting to become one of being kind of troublemaker. And she describes how she spends a chunk of every day, right after lunch, dealing with untangling the mess that recess has made. And she's describing how disruptive it is, and she's going on, and she's getting more and more worked up, and she finally comes up for breath, and she says, "Can't you do something?" And I was a little taken aback. I was there to talk about the artist residency program, but in that moment when she said that, it occurred to me that when I was growing up, that I grew up in D.C., and I'm 49, so I'm that generation of women, sort of post-Title IX. I got to play all the sports, but I often ended up playing with the boys. Anyway, when I was growing up, I would go to this Macomb Street playground every day after school, and there was this guy, Clarence, and he was probably 23, 24. He was like the park and rec worker, and he didn't make a big political deal out of it, but he just made sure I got to be in the game. He made sure that whatever was going on, I got to play. I had to hold my own once I was in the game, but Clarence made sure I got in the game. And so in that moment when Ms. Payton, the principal there at Santa Fe, said, "Can't you do something?" I had this flash that I could make it possible for every kid to have a Clarence. That was really what ran through my brain. But I have good self-preservation skills, and Ms. Payton was so worked up that I sort of backed away from the raging principal and said, "Well, I don't know. But we tested the model that next year in 2 schools, and at the time I was actually pregnant with my oldest child. And I didn't think I wanted to start a new big nonprofit. I didn't know, honestly, I had no idea what I was getting myself into, even though it was the second nonprofit I'd started. But I got into, so I eased my toe in the water. We started just with these 2 schools, part-time. I played college basketball, and I recruited this woman that I played college basketball with to be the person to work in the 2 schools. And it just kind of started to take up, momentum of its own. And principals at other schools would hear that I was doing this program, and they'd call and say, "Hey, we heard you're fixing recess. We want you at our school." And so I started getting all these calls, and it was a really interesting way to grow a business, very much in response to demand coming from the schools. So it started slow, 2 schools, then the next year went to 7 schools, then went to 18 schools. And along the way, people started to hear about it more and more. In fact, we started to hear about it nationally, and about, I guess, it was probably around 2005, I was awarded this Ashoka Social Entrepreneurship Fellowship. So that was what really got me beginning the process of trying to think about okay, so I have this idea, and we know that it works in the schools, and we know there's demand from the principals, but what would it take to scale it? And if I am going to scale it, what does that even really mean? And becoming an Ashoka Fellow was a really fascinating prospect. The woman who was the president of Ashoka at the time is a woman named Sushmita Ghosh, amazing social entrepreneur from India. And I remember being in her office when she was interviewing me for the Ashoka Fellowship. And it was the intellectual equivalent of having someone climb down your throat and pull out a big idea. Because prior to the interview with her, I could talk about what we did and why it was important, but she kept saying to me, so if you're successful one day, and I was like, what? And it was like, I don't know if you're watching a channel you haven't paid for and the channel blocker comes on, you're like, what is that? What are you getting at? And I was like, really? And it was like, went on and on and on with this, like, what's the one day, how will the world be different if you are successful? How will the system be changed? And I remember she must have said that same phrase to me over and over again and tried to ask me in a different way. And finally I said, one day every child in America will get to play every day. And I know that doesn't sound like, revelatory or anything, and yet for me, in that moment, when we went from being this organization that was just trying to, be a bigger organization to an organization that was actually trying to change the system and trying to actually scale in that way, everything changed. All the decisions about how we would operate and where we would go and how we would allocate resources, just suddenly I was compelled to look at them with a different set of criteria. So let me back up and tell you a little more about what Playworks does. There are two main parts to our business. The first is we have a direct service model, and we have offices in 23 cities across the country. We have a staff of about 600 people. And in those 23 offices, they work in our direct service model with low-income public elementary schools. And basically, we send people, a full-time coach into each one of 380 schools this year, and they are there Monday through Friday from before school starts all through the school day until after school. And so they work a full week, full-time job, and the North Star is recess. So they're out on the schoolyard for every recess. And in a lot of ways, they function like the older kids in the neighborhood used to function when I was a kid growing up. They're the ones out there teaching the kids the rules to games, teaching them how to do rock, paper, scissors when there's a conflict, teaching them, teams are uneven, Jill and BB, you switch sides, which is a fairly nuanced transaction, that whole idea of self-handicapping, right? All this sort of very basic, creating a structure, but not with an idea of imposing that structure on the kids, but creating that structure in that environment, and then giving the kids, empowering the kids with the skills, and norming the behaviors, right? Being that grown-up out there, norming a set of behaviors around empathy, teamwork, leadership, inclusion, so that you really create this culture of kindness. And that play is this vehicle for doing that. So recess is the first and foremost thing that we do at the school, and that's going in. So it was interesting, I was out talking to an APS school today, and they don't have recess. So I would have been arrested if I hadn't been in an elementary school with recess. So I'm always kind of, fascinated, like, wow, what's that like to be 7 and go to a school with no recess? But it happens. And so we just helped bring recess back into Chicago, and I'm fascinated with trying to figure out how we might be able to bring recess back to APS schools that don't have it. So recess is first and foremost. The next part is we do both an out-of-school time program, both before school and after school. We do, with a lot of low-income schools, we'll get there and have recess before school, run around, play games, and we do it in conjunction with a free breakfast program. Free breakfast in America is one of those, like, shockingly underappreciated sort of silver bullets. The research around around breakfast is outrageous as far as having an amazing positive impact on reducing obesity with kids, as well as improving performance around testing, but just in general academic performance. Being physically active before your school day starts is just, it's the right way to go. And then after school, we also run after school programs for groups of kids, again, being physically active. We have a junior coach program where we identify about 15 to 20 kids in any school, the oldest kids, and and they're kids with leadership skills. The key part is that recognizing that leadership doesn't always get manifest in the best possible way. So I was talking before about superpowers. These are kids who are some using their superpowers for good and some not using them for good so much. We use all those kids to be junior coaches. Kids who have attention and getting behaviors, we give them attention and redirect that into a positive way. And I think just doing that piece is part of why we have such a tremendous impact on reducing suspension and discipline problems. The Open Society Institute, George Soros' group, funds us in Baltimore because their interest in our program is that we have a diverting effect on what they call the school-to-prison pipeline. The experience, particularly for young black men or boys, of getting in trouble, and first it starts out with just being suspended, and then you get discipline problem, suspension leads to to misdemeanors, leads to felonies, and you just become inured to getting in trouble. It just becomes part of your identity. And the OSI folks are interested in exploring the possibility that if you can get kids off that track, can you change that pathway? So I got recess, I got out of school time, I've got junior coaches. We work with classroom teachers in classroom game time to create small group settings to teach the kids the rules to games. One of the things I think that's shocking to people is that kids are coming to school and they haven't necessarily played the games like foursquare and kickball and wall ball and all the different sort of schoolyard games that people sort of think are an inherent part of childhood. They have to be taught that at some point. So we make sure that in the small groups kids learn the games. And then the last part is interscholastic leagues. So in a city where we have a full-time program, a direct service program, we also are doing interscholastic leagues, which is a chance for families to get involved, and it's a way to introduce competition and that feels good and positive. So that's direct service. We also have a training business, and I was mentioning this earlier. With our direct service model, we charge schools between $25,000 and $30,000 a year to have this full-time person, and they often use Title I funds and other funds to have it, and then it costs us more than that to run the program, and we fundraise the balance. With our training business, we train anybody. And for me, that's an important piece. So we train more affluent schools, we train Catholic schools, we train rural schools, we train Department of Defense schools. We're working with tribal communities in New Mexico. We're doing some international. I'm going to Japan on Saturday. And the training business, unlike sort of your traditional, not like your father's nonprofit, we actually charge the schools full cost. We actually have commission-based salespeople who are calling people to sell the trainings. And that is our broad adoption strategy. So while we're serving 380 schools through direct service, we're training another 1,000 schools this year. So we'll reach almost 500,000 kids in total. It's not quite 200,000 through direct service, but over 300,000 through training. What's interesting about broad adoption, again, this is going back to when I was telling you that I had that sort of moment of realizing the vision, right, is that one day every child in America will get to play every day. And so if you start from a place of thinking, okay, there's 60,000 public elementary schools in this country, if you really want to change the system, you can't just rely on the one-off model where replication is so hard. You need to figure out a broad adoption strategy. And even with our direct service and our training model, that alone in combination isn't enough to ultimately get to 60,000, right? That's also going to take a communication strategy. So we have a lot of open source stuff. We make our curriculum available. We're looking at doing the whole MOOC thing, the massively open online curriculum, to do trainings for people we'll never touch directly. And actually, I wrote a novel. I wrote a novel called, for kids, it's called Recess Rules, and that's coming out next month. It's for 8 to 13-year-olds. So trying to figure out ways of like, how do you use popular culture and mass media to change the conversation? So that's kind of what we do. It was mentioned too about our impact. One of the things I think in conjunction with trying to scale, and especially having 23 offices, is that it became increasingly clear to me that if you were gonna assure yourself of program fidelity, basically, if you wanted to make sure that Playworks in Oakland, California looked like Playworks New Orleans, looks like Playworks Salt Lake City, looked like Playworks Durham, looks like Playworks Boston, that we needed to really create some metrics and to really use data to make sure that we were doing what we say we do and that we have a high degree of accountability. So One book I'd recommend if you are interested in this field is Mario Marino wrote a book called Leap of Reason, and it's all about managing to outcomes. It's about nonprofits, well, great nonprofits, just like great for-profit businesses, holding themselves accountable to metrics and using them in a reasonable, thoughtful way. Mario came to the nonprofit sector from the for-profit sector, and I will share with you that I have a fair bit of cynicism sometimes about folks who have made a lot of money in the for-profit sector and then come to the nonprofit sector with the attitude that they're going to drop their knowledge on us and save us from ourselves. I tend to find that a little patronizing and troubling, and I feel like I've done just fine by myself. Thank you very much. But when I am wrong, I am the first to admit it, or the second probably to admit it. And I think with Mario, he really went through an extraordinary learning process. I think he did come in with a lot of hubris, thinking that he knew what he knew. And then in the process of working with nonprofits, came to really understand that it is very complicated, that you have multiple customers and investors. And taking that all into consideration, came up with an approach around using metrics that is very powerful. So we use Salesforce. Anybody know Salesforce? CRM. We use it religiously. They've been incredibly generous. They're one of our big national sponsors. And all of our program staff use it to manage data around attendance and performance of the program in the schools. We use it to manage our mailing list. We use to manage all sorts of different information that we use to make sure that our program is running effectively. And we do a lot of evaluation work, both surveys with teachers and students and principals and parents and family members to make sure that they're happy with the program. It's a very strong customer orientation. This last year, we finished up a 2-year randomized control trial. And a randomized control trial is basically the gold standard of evaluation. And basically, the way it works is we started with 29 schools, none of which had had Playworks before, all of which wanted Playworks schools. They were matched in demographics and income levels and all those things. Chose 17 to have Playworks, 12 did not get Playworks for 2 years. And Mathematica Policy Research and Stanford University went in and did a whole series of metrics on them. And when you do an RCT, they're super expensive and a little scary because often, because the bar for statistical significance is so high, it is not uncommon for you to spend all this money and have no findings, which absolutely I found galling and terrifying. But we were very lucky, and there were 4 main findings. The first was that at Playworks schools, teachers reported that bullying was 43% lower than at non-Playworks schools. So that's the biggest statistical finding that's ever been found around a reduction in bullying. And what I think is so interesting about that is that it wasn't a targeted intervention. People often say, oh, so you're a bullying program. I'm like, we're not. We're a play recess program. We happened to find out along the way that that kind of a large school-wide student engagement strategy has a huge impact on bullying. The second thing they found was that there was a dramatic increase in vigorous physical activity, which from a health perspective, public health, getting more vigorous physical activity is it is what you're hoping for. Vigorous physical activity is, if it were a drug and I'd invented it, I'd be the richest person in this room. Kids reported feeling significantly safer at Playworks schools. And with everything going on in the world, one of the things we know that's very true, that a fundamental precondition to learning is feeling safe. And so the dramatic increase in kids reporting feeling safer, not just at recess, but throughout the school day at Playworks schools, is a very, very important finding. And then finally, we found that we were recovering a tremendous amount of instructional time. In fact, it worked out to be about 24 hours of instructional time per class in Playworks schools. And what's so both surprising and important about that is that from a financial perspective, if you're going to monetize anything during the school day, it's instructional time, right? That's what we're paying for, the actual moments when the rubber's hitting the road and teachers are teaching. And the fact that we were recovering 24 hours of instructional time, and it wasn't magical, right? Basically what was happening is BB and I weren't getting into a fight out at recess, so when we came back into the classroom and we'd gotten to run around and had a good time, we just sat down and were ready to learn, as opposed to BB and I have this unresolved conflict that we're bringing it back into the classroom, and the teacher needs to spend the next 10 minutes chilling BB out because she's so wrong, right? So what are we going to do with that? So that recovered instructional time, ultimately that 24 hours of recovered instructional time, when monetized out, we worked with an economist, it's about a 200% return on the cost of the program. So that's been a great piece to see. I guess taken as a whole, what's interesting to me is to think about on the spectrum of nonprofits that we are, I think, like the very best of for-profits, really we fall into a couple of different categories, and it depends on what your goal is and where you're trying to go. We decided at a point during our trajectory that the goal was to really try and scale this, to be a systems-changing organization. I don't think that that's actually the best path for every nonprofit. I think there should be small, local nonprofits, just like there are mom-and-pop businesses, right? It is not for every nonprofit. And I think sometimes the sector can use some very blunt instruments comparing apples and oranges. You would not compare the local restaurant with Coca-Cola in terms of what you expected them to do in terms of business management and other practices. And I think those similar distinctions need to be made for nonprofits. I think that when it comes to judging nonprofits, it is also an extraordinarily irrational market. People give, well, the metrics are so important, and there's so much talk about it in the sector about how much funders care about metrics, and they care about data. My overwhelming experience is that people really care about data when it reinforces what they emotionally already believed. And so I think the sector also ultimately, to fulfill its greatest potential, needs to have a philanthropic sector that is also equally rigorous and committed to seeing the change that it puts the stake in the ground that it says it wants. So I think it's a complicated field. I think the complexity of the sector and how we grow and how we ultimately address the challenges that are out there, it's not something that's going to be simple or that we're going to solve tomorrow. But I do tend to be of the school of thought that objects in the mirror are closer than they appear, that there is a lot of reason to be tremendously hopeful, and that especially traveling all the way around the country the way I do, I see a lot of solutions that work. The fact that we actually in our schools are able to reduce bullying the way we have, we are just one of many, many solutions that are out there and proven. And that what it's going to take is not more magical thinking, but a real collective will among the citizenry to make that happen. So the leadership piece is, I think, where the gap is right now. And I'm actually really thrilled to be here because I think the leadership is very much in this room and in rooms like this all around the country. And so I am very pleased and honored that you're even here just to consider the ideas and to consider what your role might be in actually taking not just these ideas about play, but all the different ideas that are out there about the environment and water and health and violence prevention and all the different things that face us and that we ultimately have to figure out. So thank you so much, and I'm ready for questions whenever you are. So, yeah. There are 2 mics that are going to be wandering around.
One of the things you mentioned is something that I'm not sure the audience knows about, and that's the Ashoka Fellows. If you can tell us a little bit more about Ashoka and what it means to be a fellow.
Sure. So Ashoka, it's an international fellowship for social entrepreneurs, started a little over 30 years ago by a guy named Bill Drayton, who is a mentor and just a totally wonderful, brilliant, very quirky guy who I admire and love very much. And it was started actually with a focus initially on Southeast Asia, India, and then South America. Biggest concentrations of fellows are in Brazil and in India, but it's all over the world. I think it's over 30 countries now. North America, I was actually the second class of fellows in 2005 or 6. So it's still a fairly new phenomenon here in North America. The idea, though, is to really support social entrepreneurs, and it is really sort of the Margaret Mead idea that a great idea in the hands of a social entrepreneur and a group of people who are willing to make that change is really the only thing that we've ever seen that affects really tremendous change. Yeah. There's a mic back there.
Hey, Is Playworks something that works at all ages, or is it primarily operating in elementary schools?
So it's a great question. So before we started to scale, I was operating in elementary schools and middle schools and high schools, and we were working with incarcerated youth. And this is, I think, a truth for whether it's for-profits or nonprofits. When we decided to scale, it became clear that this was going to require a level of rigor and focus. So we knew that what we do best is the elementary school age. So we, in the scaling process, just narrowed our focus. And so the scaling has been really focused on elementary schools. It's interesting, at some point, and we might be getting close. I was a camp counselor, I taught. My thing about working with kids is that it's always easier to come in with kids and you're sort of tighter, you run it, I don't know if anybody's coached or whatever, but you want to be like a little bit tighter on how you run games when you start, and then you can loosen up. You don't want to come in and be loosey-goosey because it's harder to regain control. So that's similar to how I think about sort of the city. So we might be getting to the place now where we can go back to serving some older kids, but we knew when we were working with incarcerated youth, they were having tremendous impacts. It was a very expensive model to run, and so in scaling we wanted to go smaller. The other thing is we also do a bunch of work with grown-ups. We do corporate recess, and we have a corporate kickball tournament, and it works really well with grown-ups too. Yeah. Yeah.
Thanks for talking to us today, but I had a question. Did you ever face any challenges when you were implementing Playworks? And if you did, like, how did you go about solving it?
Sure. So do you want today's challenge? Constantly. So the one that's probably the most emblematic one was that, I mentioned I got the Ashoka Fellowship, and then the story about the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation granting to us is kind of astounding and not your ordinary story. So I'm in my office, and I get this phone call, and the woman says, "Hi, this is Nancy Barron from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation." And I'm like, "Wow, really?" And she says, "So we've been hearing about you, and we'd like to see an aggressive and provocative business plan for national expansion." Now, one of my favorite funders in the world is in the room, but I will say this with so much love. Funders never, ever say aggressive or provocative. So I'm convinced in this moment she can't possibly be who she says she is. So I do this thing which I would not recommend to future fundraisers. I question her identity. I'm like, who is this really? Because I played on the women's national rugby team, and I was fairly convinced it was a rugby playing teammate just calling and yanking my chain. So in fact, it really was Nancy Barron calling to ask about an aggressive and provocative business plan, and we overcame my initial doubt and questioning. And we went back and forth, and they gave us $4.4 million to test the model in 3 cities outside of California, which was mind-blowing, right? Completely overwhelming. The biggest grant, like by a magnitude of 7 or something that I'd ever gotten. And really, it was pretty much just enough rope to hang myself with. So we start trying to replicate, and in that moment, I really thought that bigger was just bigger. I thought we would just do more of the same. But what became quickly obvious was that bigger wasn't just bigger. Bigger was really different. And when we opened these offices in the new cities, people I remember the guy from Boston calling and saying, "I really want to be part of national expansion." I'm like, "You're opening the office," but people had a vision that was not great about what it was, and I actually had to come face to face with the fact that the reason that they weren't seeing that they were part of national expansion and they were unhappy with the whole process as it was going was that I wasn't managing well through it, that I wasn't helping them see themselves in the change. And so we went through this extraordinarily painful process where what had gotten us to this point of tremendous success, which gave us this investment, was in fact the diametric opposite of what we needed to go move forward. That while we'd been incredibly nimble and responsive and everyone could do everything, and all these amazing sort of liberal arts people who were wicked smart and could write, but also could design t-shirts and could also jerry-rig enough of a HR system to get people paid, wasn't what we needed moving forward. We needed functional expertise. We needed, who knew management was a real thing? All these sort of horrifying lessons. And so in the process, 4 of my senior staff decided that this was just a giant ego trip of mine, that going to scale was a terrible idea, and they quit in the middle of it. And these were folks who were friends. They were people who had all gone to each other's kids' birthday parties. And it was devastating. And being an Ashoka Fellow at that time was super helpful. All these people who I kind of peripherally knew, who'd also tried to scale organizations, reached out and said, oh yeah, this is what happens. You will lose friends. And I'm like, you knew this? You knew I was going to lose friends and you let me do this? Like what? So that was probably one thing that comes to mind. How's that for an answer? Okay. Yeah.
Oop, do you want to go ahead and go? Or?
You could rock, paper, scissors.
Okay, I'll go. Hey, Jill. So I'm interested in hearing a little bit more about how you guys develop your junior coaches and what kind of intentional programming, if any, you do to kind of help them unlock their superpowers and develop this culture of kindness.
Sure. So, super intentional. It starts with, so the coach is on the schoolyard and gets to know kids and is watching. And so one of the cool things about the coach is that she or he meets every single student at the school. And what's really astounding to me is that they tend to know all 400 to 700 names. In fact, in Detroit, we were in a school, it's 1,200 K5, which is just mad crazy. But I swear our coach knew all 1,200 names, which I'm just, how is that even possible? But anyway, and so they develop relationships and they start to identify a few kids and then they work with the school staff to identify kids who are candidates, either because they've exhibited either leadership skills in one way or the other, or it feels like a little more attention would be a good thing, or that maybe some social skills they could work on building, and this would be a great way to do it. And so the kids then fill out an application form and do an interview. There's a whole interview process, and that goes on, and they have to meet certain requirements. It has to be around academic performance, which isn't necessarily the same thing as grades. It's a level of effort, generally speaking, and if the teacher is seeing that kind of effort. And so it becomes a huge incentive for kids who haven't necessarily been academically motivated. And then on Friday afternoons, there's a dedicated afternoon for junior coach leadership training. And then they cycle in, depending on what the bell schedule is and stuff like that. Generally, groups of 4 to 6 coming out for recesses and taking turns, and then they have a schedule. And one of the things we know from working with kids, especially with working with severely emotionally disturbed kids, is that it's all about transitions. And so we're very intentional about bringing the kids all out, having them check in, very ritual, right? So check in before they begin their shift as a junior coach, remind them what the goal is for the day, what if there's a special message, and then doing a debrief after every one. And it can feel a little, contrived almost. But what we find is that that in going through those very intentional emotions and making it so structured like that, that there's a rhythm and an ease that creates a greater sense of safety and really creates more of an opportunity for kids to talk about the things that come up and that are going on. It's funny, one of the things I was talking about, because now that we've assured ourselves of a high degree of program fidelity, the office in Phoenix last year tested a model they called the Junior Coach Leadership Program, and they did it in conjunction with some students at ASU. And so they did junior coaches every day after school, and they worked with the ASU students to design a whole sort of leadership development program for these 20 kids in each one of the schools. And then they came together for this big conference with junior coaches from all over the city. And then it's cool because they're all going to go off to middle school together, and it really is a source of connection.
Hey, I was wondering what kind of metrics you use to measure success when you're going to go present it to your funders.
So we start with sort of some basic business measures around school retention. So schools are paying between $25,000 and $30,000. Are they re-upping? Are they happy when they're filling out their program satisfaction? How satisfied are they? I have this sort of, I was laughing, like they did this, we got the teacher reports from last year, and 99% of the teachers were totally satisfied with the program, and I was like, who is that 1% of teachers who are not satisfied? And everyone's like, really, Jill? You're going to focus on the 1%? I'm like, that's where I am. So the teacher satisfaction in the school retention is high. We look at numbers of kids served. We're looking at increases in, and then we're looking at the stuff that we looked at the RCT, continuing to follow that, the reduction in bullying. We track suspensions and discipline rates at schools. We've got a new study going on that just got funded, and we're looking at chronic absence. So one of the cool things, I don't know if you know anything about chronic absence, but basically kids who are absent 10% or more school days in elementary school are like 10 times more likely to be kids who are going to drop out. It's like the best, better than actually parents' academic performance, parents' academic achievement, which is the one that people usually use to determine how well kids are going to do in high school. Chronic absence in elementary school is just incredible in terms of being a predictive indicator of kid dropout rate. We've shown, at least in preliminary studies, there's some kids who are going to be chronically absent because of health issues and stuff like that, but we were able to move the needle in a Baltimore study around chronic absence, so we're delving more into attendance and how that works. And then we have just some really internal metrics that we use. So for every 8 of our coaches, there's a program manager who oversees them, and they will go out and observe the school playground. And they're looking for very specific things like, are kids playing in groups that are mixed by age, gender, and ethnicity? Are they using pro-social conflict resolution tools? Like, are they using rock, paper, scissors? What percentage of kids are participating in some activity? What are kids starting their own games? So there's a number of different indicators that we look at as well. So besides the randomized control trial stuff that we pursue, we're using all that other data as well. And then I got to tell you too, we're also looking at, because it's a business, I'm tracking my executive directors around how much money they raise. Are they managing their P&L well? And then I have salespeople, and I'm looking at, are they hitting their targets? So, it's got both sides.
Hi, Jill. So my question is, why are schools eliminating recess, and what are they replacing that hour with?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I have a theory, and I'll tell you my theory. Schools are under a tremendous amount of pressure, and they're being held accountable to a fairly narrow set of guidelines. And what they are seeing is kids who are growing up in a culture of play that has really profoundly eroded, definitely since I was a kid, and maybe even since you were an elementary school kid, right? So when I was growing up, I played outside, unsupervised, every day after school, all weekend, all summer long. And so I learned all these skills that when I came to recess, I could do pretty well resolving conflicts, getting a game going, keeping a game going. And so there might have been teachers out on the recess yard, but they weren't actively engaged. So what teachers are dealing with now, and this is across all the economic spectrum, right? So low-income kids, parents are justifiably concerned about neighborhood violence and keeping their kids in. More middle and affluent kids, for a host of reasons between, I think, fear because of milk carton photos around missing children and the media, and then super structured lives where you go from one structured activity to another, those kids aren't getting those unsupervised chances to learn those skills either. So if you're a classroom teacher and you're being held accountable to a certain performance around a scripted literacy curriculum or performance on standardized tests, and you have your kids, right, and you take them out for recess and you let them out and they don't know how to play well together, and it devolves into conflict. Again, BB and I are fighting, and it's awful, and then you come back into classroom and it spills over into the classroom. It's a huge disincentive. And so it's easy to sort of say, oh, the schools are so stupid, why would they do that? And yet, I think leading from a place of empathy, they feel so much pressure to hit the test scores, to deliver this much of the state framework. And if you have a negative recess experience over and over and over again, that's really preventing that. And we live in a more litigious society, right? So, in Boston, they outlawed running briefly while we were there. I was like, no, you can't outlaw running. Like, they still had recess, but we work in districts where there's no tag. Come on, people. Like, it's just, grown-ups are crazy. That's also part of the answer. But, the combination, right, is that I think people, so one of my favorite stories is we were at a school in San Jose, and I get this email, it wasn't a call, I get this email from a principal saying, your program's amazing, I just want to thank you. It's the most amazing thing. You all have stopped the graffiti from happening in the bathroom. And I'm like, I will take credit for anything good that happens within a 5-mile radius of where we are, but that one was really astounding to me. I was like, why is that? And she said, well, listen, here's what happened. Before, recess was so awful that the boys would go into the bathroom and tag all over the place. And so I had to assign a teacher to guard the bathroom door. And I thought, and then she said, but when you guys all came, then the kids stopped going into the bathroom to tag the door, and that teacher didn't have to stand there, and the kids stopped going in there to tag, so I didn't have to have the teacher assigned. Most of the way that education responds is instead of figuring out why are the kids going in to tag the bathroom wall, they just assign the teacher to guard the bathroom door. Yeah. Hey.
As you dream of the future of Playworks, what is the biggest challenge that you see in the next 10 years?
Well, I think, so it is a sort of confounding experience. Do y'all remember there used to be a cartoon about this guy and he finds a frog that can sing. Have y'all ever seen that? And he goes, oh, mama, baby, oh, mama, you know. I got nothing on the frog cartoon. Come on, John, you must have seen the frog cartoon. Thank you, I appreciate that. So anyway, there's this guy, right, and there's this the cartoon is about this guy, and he finds this frog that can sing. And he's like, oh my God, I'm gonna be rich. And he buys a theater, and he sells all these tickets, and he's gonna be rich, and he gets this frog out of the box, and the frog won't sing. Right? And then he's like, what? Anyway, it's this whole cartoon. So I have this experience that I feel like I've discovered this frog that sings. Like, oh my God, we reduced bullying by 43%. Kids feel safer. They're more vigorously physically active. We recover instructional time. And yet, because it's recess and it's play, and the economic and educational climate is more about test scores and academic achievement, a lot of people are dismissive. So that's incredibly flummoxing and really? You know? So I think the thing I'm dreaming of, the thing I am really hoping for, is that in 10 years, we will have shifted away from a sense that the kids we are building schools for are these other alien creatures, and move to a place as the grown-ups in charge of leading with empathy, of really believing that the kids who are out there are just we 20 years ago, or longer for me, but not for you, you know? And then if we were then building schools from that place of empathy and really creating opportunities for them to feel engaged and heard and like they have a voice and that they have choice around the learning that they're doing, that we stand a chance of actually helping them to grow up to be the citizens that not only do they deserve to get to become, but that we desperately need them to be. I guess my fear is that we, the grown-ups in charge, will not rise to this occasion, that we will not give the kids the benefit of the doubt, that we will not lead with empathy.
Jill, this will be our final question.
Okay.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi. I have two questions. If it's the
You only
final,
said
you
one.
can choose.
Sorry.
Then you can choose whichever one you want to
Okay,
answer.
I'm teasing.
The first one is, so I took a class called Digital Play last semester, and I was wondering how does or could digital technology affect Playworks and the kids?
Yep.
And the second one is, how do you get kids with disabilities engaged and playing with other kids?
Sure. I'll start with the digital and then I'll just do them in order. So actually it's so funny, I think I'm horribly disappointing to the local media people in the Bay Area because they're always calling me and asking me to sort of say disparaging things about media and digital. I played a lot of Zelda in my early 20s, and so you're not going to get me to slam, and I watched a lot of television. That being said, I believe that kids given the choice to play outside unsupervised will always choose that over digital stuff, and so I think the prevalence of screen time and digital play is filling the vacuum that other play has left. I think both can happen. I think a great game is a great game. There are great games that are digital. There are great games that are outside. There's space for both. There are bad games that I don't let my kids watch. I think parents and families have a huge responsibility to be engaged with how their kids play. But I think it's real. I don't think that digital play is a substitution for the social emotional skills that are learned through the non-virtual world, the real world. So I think you need to have both, but I think it would be silly and futile to pretend like digital play is not going to go away, and I think we should embrace it and just make sure that we make much, much more opportunity for outside real play available. And we haven't done an adequate job doing that. So that's the answer to that question. With disability, we make a really huge effort to make sure that inclusion is one of the first and foremost goals. And I think, for me, one of the highest values, one of the most extraordinary benefits of being focused on play the way I am is that inherent in play is this message that we are all somewhere on a spectrum of ability, right? And so I think normalizing ability and disability and recognizing that play is inherently adaptive, like that's what it's all about, and that the more activities in which kids participate in and where we make a concerted effort to adapt to not only the environment in which we're operating, but to the various needs and abilities of the participants is actually fundamental to our democracy. And it's an extraordinary skill that I think playing well together in schools gives kids so that they can take that with them into adulthood. So I think it's not only is it something that we do well, but it's absolutely inherent and critical to our mission. Thanks.
Jill, thanks for coming to Georgia Tech today.
Thank you so much.
The Yellow Jackets.